Here is my Desert Sorceress build, inspired by the ones from Dark Souls 2. This build combines the use of fire incantations and the magma blade, which was indirectly buffed by the introduction of the Talisman of the Dread. What makes this build truly special is the very effective use of Malenia's Great Rune. As you might know, Malenia's Great Rune gives you time to recover lost health by attacking an enemy right after getting hit. And the skill of the magma blade scatters magma all around you while you perform it. This magma will hit your enemies many times and will linger on the ground, dealing even more damage over time if they walk on it. What you might not have known is that the magma does work with the Great Rune, resulting in you recovering high amounts of health very quickly. Even the magma lingering on the ground will recover your health too. Look at this clip of me performing the skill, getting my attack interrupted by the boss, but still recovering my health anyway because of the lingering magma on the ground. Pretty cool, I think. This basically means that if you're aggressive and know which windows to attack in, you basically never have to use your health flasks. This gives the spell tons of survivability, despite it being technically on the glass cannon side of things. For what spells to use, we of course use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for more damage and defense, but for what offensive spells to use, it's up to you really. Any fire spell will synergize greatly with this setup, so feel free to use any combination of Giant Flame spells, the Black Flame spells, or even the messmer fire spells, and maybe use their respective seals for more damage with them. I personally like to use the Giant Flame spells because they fit this spell the most in terms of looks. Another spell I like to use is Catch Flame, which isn't a Giant Flame spell, so it isn't boosted by the seal, but it is an amazing melee spell with tons of DPS, and will usually outperform your regular sword swings. For talismans, we of course use the Shard of Alexander for more weapon art damage, the Talisman of the Dread, which increases magma damage by 15%, the Fire Scorpion Charm, which raises all fire damage dealt by 12%. It does however result in us taking 10% more damage, so if you don't want that, feel free to use Flux Canvas Talisman for an 8% increase to incantation damage, Millicent's Prosthesis for more damage with consecutive attacks, or the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for a 20% physical damage negation. Our fourth talisman of choice is the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, which increases damage dealt with consecutive attacks. For the physic, I use the Flame Shrouded Cractier for more fire damage, and the Thorny Cractier for more damage with consecutive attacks. And for the look, I'm using the altered version of the Rotten Grave Creeper Cloak, the Rotten Duelist Greaves, the Traveler's Manchets, and the Crimson Hood. This setup makes us light roll, which makes us a very agile character. It also makes us look very, hot. Next is my Dragon Fist build. We all know the trope of skilled martial artists being dragons, and this is a version of that in Elden Ring. The idea of this build is to combine two items. First is the dragon form from the DLC, and the second item is the Blue Dancer Charm. The Blue Dancer Charm talisman gives us more physical damage the less equipment load that we have, and the dragon form weighs nothing, but gives us a nice 10% damage negation to all damage types. So we get all the benefits of being naked, like more damage and being able to light roll, while lessening the downsides of us taking more damage. Our weapon of choice is the Heavy Infused Dry Leaf Arts, which is one of the two martial art weapons introduced in the DLC. They both have 1 unit of weight, which means that they're the lightest weapons in the game that can deal physical damage, making them a natural fit for this build. You could use Dane's Footwork instead, which is much better at guard counters, but I'm not really focusing on that here, and which one is better for our use case is really down to preference, and so I chose this one. What Ashford you choose is again mostly down to preference, but I went with Dry Leaf Whirlwind before, so I'm going with Palm Blast this time, which is a chargeable attack that gives us a huge amount of poise while charging it, and deals very heavy damage. It also sends enemies flying. The Rock Heart, which is the item that we use to transform into a dragon, can be used afterwards to give you a 20% damage buff to all dragon incantations for 60 seconds. And so it makes sense to cast dragon incantations with this build. Our seal of choice is the Clawmark Seal, which is a seal that scales with strength, which is a good match for a strength build such as this one. For what spells to use, spells like Dragon Maw, Dragon Claw, and the Rat Dragon spells all deal physical damage, and so they benefit from the Blue Dancer Charm. I also recommend using Dragon Ice, because it can inflict Frostbite, which deals a chunk of damage and makes enemies take 20% more damage. The reason we use this instead of Borealis' Mist is that they both deal the same amount of build-up, meaning they both proc Frostbite at the same speed as each other. The only difference between them is damage, and the fact that Borealis' Mist is slower and more expensive, and they both deal magic damage, which means that they don't benefit from the Blue Dancer Charm, which is important for other spells because we don't have much incantation scaling, and the buff makes up for that, and so we use Dragon Ice just for its ability to proc Frostbite. By the way, both of the rot spells deal the same amount of stats build-up too, which means I prefer Rotten Breath over the more expensive one, but they both deal physical damage, so there is more of a case to using the more expensive one here, because it gets more damage and more range. For what talismans to use, I'm focusing on heavy attacks with this build, and so besides the Blue Dancer Charm, I'm using the Axe Talisman for more charged attack damage. Charged heavy attacks makes us stance break enemies very frequently, and so I use the Blade of Mercy for a 20% damage buff on a repost. And finally, I use the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia for more damage with consecutive attacks. For the physic, I like to use the Thorny Cractier for more damage with consecutive attacks, and the spiked crack tier for more damage with charged heavy attacks. For the look, there's not much to say here. We're not really wearing any armor, we're just using the dragon form, but we're still gonna be seeing our character each time we die, and before reapplying the transformation. And so, I went for this look for my base character, based on the draconian race from the character creator. Here are the sliders for it. Here we have my Fire Paladin build. This build is all about using a shield and a flail to stance break enemies very quickly and also make good use of the unique weapon art of the serpent flail. I always wanted to make a shield and a flail build, but it didn't make much sense because they were all bad. But the serpent flail from the DLC is actually pretty decent. The weapon art buffs our weapon with fire, making it deal more damage. But the real star of the show here is how it explodes when you do moves that slam the flail on the ground, dealing very heavy damage and consuming the buff in the process. Attacks that set off the explosions are running heavy attacks, jumping heavy attacks, rolling attacks, and charged heavy attacks. My favorite of these, and the one I use the most, is the running heavy attack. It's faster than the jumping heavy attack, and it deals about as much damage as the uncharged heavy attack. But unlike that one, there are items that actually buff the running heavy attack, so it's more useful overall. And we never use the charged heavy attack because of just how slow it is. Items that buff running heavy attacks would include Leda's armor, which gives us 10% damage buff to running and dodging attacks, and the lacerating cross tree talisman, which also buffs our running attacks. Other talismans that I use would be the Shard of Alexander, which I didn't expect to buff this weapon at all, but it actually does, the curved sword talisman for better guard counter damage, and of course the Blade of Mercy for a 20% damage buff after repost. Another item that I like to use is the Winged Serpent Helmet, which does buff all Fire Knight spells, including this one. My shield of choice is the Serpent Crest shield, which is one of the coolest looking shields in the game. It has no skill on by default, which lets us use our weapon art freely without having to two-hand our weapon. I like to use the Messmer 5 spells with this build because they fit the theme pretty well. There are only 3 spells, but they're all amazing. Fire Serpent is a delayed projectile with good tracking, meaning that it will usually hit enemies that like to dodge spells. Messmer's Orb is this close-ranged AoE spell that sends enemies flying. It has you jump very high in the air, and so it can be used to dodge some low attacks before retaliating. And Rain of Fire is a ranged AoE option that deals decent damage over time. This used to be very bad, but it was buffed and it's actually decent now. And of course we have Golden Vow and Flame grant me strength for more damage and defense. My shield choice is the Fire Knight seal, and the scaling on it isn't actually too much lower than the Earth Tree seal at our level, but it does buff our Fire Knight incantations, so using it is the obviously correct option here. For the physic, we have the Flame Shrouded Crack tier for more fire damage, and of course it wouldn't be a Clanky Mocha video if you didn't yab about the Deflecting Heart tier at least 6 times. For the look, we have the Winged Serpent Helmet and Leda's armor, and I pair them with the Fire Knight gauntlets and the Messmer Shoulder Greaves. I honestly didn't expect a flail to make it to the series, but here we are. Hello everyone, Happy New Year! This of course was the 6th video in this series. You can find the first 5 in the description below. Huge thanks to my one member. Wait, bro actually joined the members? Dude, it was a joke, you weren't supposed to do that. Well, thank you. Join the members now so that it's not actually a joke anymore. You can expect to see a whole lot of me in the upcoming days and weeks. I have so many plans for this series and many other video projects in the works. So like and subscribe if you want to see that. Until next time, bye bye!